We're so happy and proud to be able to partner with UNHCR again this year, as we have for multiple years. And thank you to Microsoft and Vodafone Foundation for making this next conversation possible around looking at refugee education, but specifically through the lens of technology. So please welcome Allison Carlson, our moderator for this conversation from Foreign Policy, and our esteemed panel.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for joining us and to Concordia for holding this important session. This week of the UN General Assembly is so important, bringing the international community together. And in the midst of the pandemic in particular, as we're all continuing to struggle with it, not only talking about how to combat it, but what happens after and how to rebuild. And one of the areas most directly impacted by the pandemic has been education. It's led to one of the greatest disruptions in education systems in history. About 1.6 billion learners affected. And refugee children and youth who are already at grave disadvantages are also being disproportionately affected by the pandemic. The lockdowns are disproportionately affecting refugees, and they're struggling to adapt to learning and struggling economically and financially to get the resources that they need. I think all of this really underscores the importance of coordinated action by the public and private sectors and the international community toward that end. And to keep education going, we really need the resourcefulness and innovation from the public sector, but also the private sector. And I'm really excited for this conversation today and honored to introduce our panelists. Today we have Kelly Clements, Deputy High Commissioner of Refugees for UNHCR. She's been in this position since 2015 and has served 3 decades in this role with UNHCR in various capacities. Before, she served as Senior Executive Service, serving Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration within the U.S. Department of State, where she was responsible for humanitarian issues in Asia, Middle East, and global policy and budget. She's been working in this area and directly with communities since the early 90s, and I'm absolutely honored to be with you today. Also, we have Kate Behncken, General Manager and Vice President and Lead of Microsoft Philanthropy. She's been working at Microsoft for over 2 decades, initially in Microsoft Australia, and then becoming the attorney for Microsoft Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and then the legal lead in Microsoft Netherlands. She's led strategic initiatives and is now in her role at Microsoft Philanthropies, where she's been since July of 2018. Also with us today is Patricia Ithau, Board of Trustees of Vodafone Foundation and Regional Director for East Africa at the Stanford Institute for Innovation in Developing Economies, or SEED. There, her expertise supports the foundation's work in Africa. She served with executive positions at regional subsidiaries in UNICEF, Diageo, and L'Oreal, and non-executive director of Absa Bank Kenya, Kenya Private Sector Alliance, and Trademark East Africa. It's such an honor to be with all 3 of you today. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. First of all, I'd like to kick it over to you, Kelly, and ask a couple questions, and if you could please give us a quick overview of what effects COVID-19 has had on education and refugees and other vulnerable communities.
Thank you so much, Allison, and I'm just delighted to be with Kate and Patricia, and thanks for having us again here at Concordia. It's really important to us in terms of shedding the spotlight, and I think that's a perfect lead-in for Jerry and Sesame Foundation. As you said, the COVID-19, the pandemic, has been the greatest disruptor for kids' education in history. 90% of learners are out of school, and for refugees, 2 times as likely to be out of school, refugee children and youth in particular. And it really affects in the post-primary area, the secondary and university levels. We issued a report actually earlier this month, Allison, in schooling. And what we really worry about is the pandemic is likely to reverse the gains that we've made. It really does threaten in terms of the Sustainable Development Goal 4, an inclusive education for all. We know that for refugees and displaced people, at-home learning is particularly difficult. Issues related to the lack of hardware, electricity, power, for example, connectivity generally, and even some of the support services that we help to provide, like languages, become difficult in this remote environment. But really, the problems go beyond education and school closures, because we see, of course, the huge economic impact that the pandemic has had. Low income, precarious livelihoods, and the refugees and displaced that we're working with all over the world tend to rely heavily on the informal sector. And we've seen job loss, of course, across the board, particularly hit the most vulnerable of the vulnerable. They struggle to pay school fees, uniforms, other ways of being able to support their kids to learn. The forecast for girls is particularly grim. What we did a little bit of research with the Malala Foundation, where we found that 50% of girls who were in school, particularly in the secondary school system, may never go back. And we're very concerned about losing the gains already that we've made. So we can bring kids back, but what does it take? It takes resourcefulness, it takes innovation, it takes generosity, and it takes collaboration. And you've got two of those foundations here on the screen with you that are perfect embodiments of that. That's the quality of private sector that we need. The coordinated action that we can all take, we can keep and get kids back into school, particularly refugee and displaced children. Thanks a lot, Allison.
Thank you. And thank you for all the work that you're doing. And to that end, and to your point about innovation and collaboration, Kate, I'd like to kick it over to you for a second. I know that Microsoft has had longstanding partnerships with UNHCR and a commitment to humanitarian action more broadly, and that you've invested in education and digital skills specifically. Can you speak for a few moments about how important those digital literacy skills are today?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I would say they are more important than ever. Digital inclusion anchors a lot of our work in Microsoft Philanthropies, and we believe that every person in every community should have the opportunity to get the digital skills needed to secure jobs and livelihoods today. Since July 2020, we've made grants to nonprofits around the world which will provide these critical digital skills to over 2 million people who are unreached or displaced by technology. But the problem is so much bigger. And the impact of COVID has only exacerbated the problem. This health crisis has become an economic crisis, and the pandemic has shined a harsh light on what was already a widening skills gap around the world. And it's a gap that we all need to help close with even greater urgency to help accelerate economic recovery. So encouraging digital literacy development in schools and in the workplace is just so important to help ensure communities and organisations aren't left behind and are productive and competitive and prepared for the demands of a tech-driven future. There is almost no industry that has not been impacted in some way by digital transformation, and almost no job that doesn't require some level of digital literacy. And while every job will be a digital job in some form or another, we also know that technology jobs, regardless of which sector, will continue to grow in demand. In fact, based on our analysis, if industries digitally transform at the maximum rate, we believe that the labour market can potentially absorb 150 million new tech roles by 2025. So that's roles in data and cloud and software development and the like. And so that's why we're Microsoft Philanthropies, we're partnering with humanitarian organisations like UNHCR, who work every day to provide aid and support to displaced people around the world. We want to do what we can to help empower refugees and displaced youth to create meaningful livelihood opportunities and also ensure more gender equality to build stronger and more resilient communities. There's two specific commitments that we've made that I call out. We have a terrific partnership with UNHCR, and we're working with them on a connected education program, with the goal being to bring digital skills training to 25,000 young refugees in Kakuma, Kenya, with an emphasis on half of those people being young women. And the second thing relates to a global skills initiative that we just launched. Global unemployment in 2020 may reach 250 million people, and it's a staggering number. And we recently launched a global skills initiative to help 25 million people acquire the digital skills that are needed by the end of 2020. So we've partnered with other Microsoft companies, LinkedIn and GitHub, with the goal being to help people that are hit hardest by job losses learn the skills for in-demand roles. So I guess to end where I started, digital inclusion opportunities are more important than ever, given the impact of COVID-19.
Absolutely. And the skills training as well that you're talking about is so important for the future. And looking at another element of partnerships as well, Patricia, over to you. And how has Vodafone and its foundation supported the COVID-19 response, and particularly with respect to education and refugees?
Thank you so much. I mean, the pandemic has really highlighted this crucial role of connectivity in society. And we all know that never before has connectivity been so important as it has been demonstrated this year. So Vodafone is a company, and through its foundations have been doing a lot since the outbreak. In concrete terms, Vodafone and its foundations, we have contributed an estimated 100 million euros in cash and in-kind donations, benefiting over 80 million people through connectivity, for health services, for key workers and vulnerable groups, and cash grants that we have given to charities. Our use of our, for example, domestic violence support app, Bright Skies, surged post-lockdown, and we repurposed a citizen science app called DreamLab, which was originally developed to support cancer research to help with COVID-19 research by scaling it across our markets. But more specifically on the question you asked on education, at Vodafone Foundation, we believe that every child really has a right to quality education, regardless of gender, country origin, or whether they can afford it or not. Pre-COVID, the refugee children were already twice as likely to be out of school than any other children. Despite the improvements in refugee environment rates, only 63% of refugees are enrolled in primary school and only 24% in secondary school. And of course, COVID has really exacerbated this situation. In April this year alone, we had 1.5 billion children and youth not attending school. So never before have so many children been without basic structured education. So what we did at Vodafone is supporting home learning by providing free access to the education platforms, Udemy and Perigio. And then one of the Vodafone Foundation's key programs in the long term has been the school-based program that we call Instant Network Schools, which uses technology to support primary education. And we've done that and worked with that to support the quality of education, not just in the communities, but in particular for support of refugees and the host communities. This, of course, what we're doing in partnership with UNHCR. So these instant network schools have provided an end-to-end solution, which includes power, connectivity, hardware, content, and training. And the objective is to use technology to really improve learning outcomes. And as a result of that, I had the pleasure, I went to Kakuma last year, and so the incredible impact that ICT literacy has among teacher and students, and in building the confidence and motivation even better for those students in their exam results. So since 2013, we have deployed this instant network in schools to 36 schools, benefiting over 86,000 refugees and host community students in camps in Kenya, Tanzania, DR Congo, and South Sudan. And we are expanding that program to reach up to 300 schools by 2025, adapting our strategy to adopt UNHCR's host governments, to support both UNHCR and host governments to integrate refugees into societies. Therefore, they move away from the camp settings that they have been in. And so with that, and in partnership with UNHCR, we aim to reach 1 million people and have we have very ambitious targets, for example, to improve exam results by 25% by the year 2025. And this year, we're moving away from not just the school we've been so far, we're deploying to another 20 new schools in Mozambique, in Egypt, and with our home ambassador, the football star Mohamed Salah, really supporting that initiative. So in a nutshell, the instant network schools will continue to be a critical part and strategy for us to drive education for refugees, especially through this COVID times in Africa and, of course, in Europe, and to help them stay informed, and also to support messaging around the spread of the virus and how to help support them staying connected with family members and, of course, driving the access to remote learning. Thank you.
Thank you. And the description really helps to illuminate what's happening on the ground and how critically important that level of connectivity is within communities for education, but also lives and livelihoods. Before the pandemic and during the pandemic, and now as we're all discussing, how are we going to build after? And thinking about that and thinking about the future and the future development and investments to that end. Kate, I'd like to ask you, how do you see, and from where you sit, what are some possible ways that refugees can continue their education and continue to access digital technologies and more inclusive apps and education opportunities? And how is that and how are those considerations shaping your future investments?
Well, I think a lot more will need to move online. So, for example, our work with UNHCR and Kakuma, we're looking to move to a hybrid model to support the greater online learning, which is just so needed in a COVID world. As we think about bringing our global skills initiative to those who need it most, we're partnering with humanitarian organisations like UNHCR and governments and others in the private sector to bring this initiative to refugee and vulnerable communities in a number of key countries in the global south. And I think as we think about future investments in a post-COVID world, which is hard to imagine what that looks like right now, we're even more focused on where we think Microsoft can bring the greatest value to help communities build back better. So as we think about what role we can uniquely play supporting these issues, it's how we work with nonprofits and NGOs to build their digital capacity and digital innovation, and so to help these organisations leverage technology to scale the work they do and reach more of the beneficiaries that they're trying to serve. And we can also bring our digital skills and digital inclusion initiatives. So we'll be investing more to build the capacity of nonprofits and NGOs that are focused on these education and digital inclusion opportunities. We're also focused on partnerships and looking at partnerships in new ways, obviously continuing to partner with nonprofits and NGOs, governments, where you can really help scale the work that we want to do. But also more recently, we're looking at how we can partner more with others in the private sector. And we're also expanding access to our AI for Humanitarian initiative. 2 years ago at Concordia, the Microsoft president, Brad Smith, launched AI for Humanitarian Action, which is a 5-year, $40 million initiative to harness the power of AI to address some of the world's biggest challenges, like we're talking about. So building on the progress of the last 2 years and the urgency of this moment, this week we're calling on nonprofits and academic institutions, UN organisations, and also private sector partners to submit applications over the next month. And these applications are for projects that leverage the power of data and AI, really leveraging technology to support disaster recovery, addressing the needs of women and children, promoting human rights, and protecting refugees and displaced people.
Great. Thank you. And if I can ask you really quickly, Patricia, how do you see mobile phone technology assisting refugees in this instance and in the context of the pandemic and after, again, as we're looking to the future?
I guess no one can achieve SDG 4 alone. So we really believe in the transformative power of partnerships, and companies can play a very big role in this. And because everything we do at Vodafone Foundation is in the spirit of connecting for good, we try and combine our charitable money, our technology, our employees, volunteering with the expertise of charity partners, such as UNHCR. So we now know mobile networks are expanding. They're reaching some of the most remote areas where refugee camps are often located, sometimes before power, before running water, or even before schools. Smartphone penetration is increasing by day, including among refugees, by the way. So for people on the move, like refugees, mobile phones have become a lifeline, a way to stay connected with the outside world and for their children to continue with their education. The potential in really connecting and blending learning becomes huge. But companies like Vodafone or Microsoft cannot do this alone. We also are now looking to other partnerships with car companies, educational content providers, and device manufacturers to come together so that we can host, and of course our host and donor governments, so that every child can access that quality education, so that we continue to invest today for a better tomorrow. If I just give a statistic of some data from Girls and Mobile Report that we conducted through the Vodafone Foundation and our Girl Effect in 2018, one of the other things is, if you look from a gender perspective, boys are one and a half times more likely to own a mobile phone than girls. And 52% of girls have to borrow this mobile phone if they want to access, compared to 28% for boys. So therefore, for us, the reality is, as a mobile company, we really have a responsibility to support all the connectivity, all the benefits, all the education, and everything else that technology and mobile phones are able to bring to these vulnerable communities.
And in the spirit of not doing it alone and collaboration, this digital platform today has brought together hundreds, if not thousands, of participants. And thank you again to Concordia for doing that. And I'd love to turn it back over now to the Deputy High Commissioner and ask you, you have this business community that's listening right now and participating in this platform. What would you say is needed and is necessary going forward in terms of collaboration and investment in interest of refugees and vulnerable populations around the world?
Thanks a lot, Allison. Very quickly, because I know we're running short. You said how to build back after. We fixed the damage from the pandemic, but we also look at sustainable and lasting positive impact. 4 ways that business can make a big difference. 1, classroom equipment and infrastructure. 2nd, help to support the return of kids to school. This is accelerated learning. You've heard some of this today. Technology to catch kids up. 3rd, conditional cash assistance to pay those school fees and the uniforms. And 4th, support connected education. And you heard from both Kate and Patricia how powerful this is as a tool. We can seize the moment, we can reduce the inequalities, and we can keep the spirit of partnership alive and challenge and channel that passion. Every action counts, and I hope everybody can get involved, as Vodafone and Microsoft both have. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks to all of you. I'm really grateful for your insights, your work, and your vision for the future. It has a tremendous impact. Thank you for your time today. And again, to all the audience for joining us. I'd like to invite you, I know we're already out of time, but to stay online for just a few more minutes. And it's a pleasure to share with you a video of 2 a.m., which is a poem by the incredible Goodwill ambassador and slam poet, Emi Mahmood. Thank you all.
2 a.m. I unpack the contents of my suitcase. The moon is rising on an earth divided, and I'm here with my brothers and sisters trying to be the bridge. My 2 decades were dotted with important global moments: the right to gay marriage, the Human Genome Project, the referendum that freed South Sudan. So I took the flight, thinking maybe we could change something. Kakuma brought to light the truth of an earth divided. 7 billion people at the breaking point. Hearing about crisis and seeing it are as different as speaking about change and making it. One is fleeting, and relies on the attention span of a restless planet. The other is everlasting and delves to the core of what makes us human. I was 7 when the first astronauts populated the International Space Station, 11 when a tsunami hit Indonesia, 18 when the first Arab woman won the Nobel Prize, 19 when I voted for the first African-American president's second term, 23 when women took charge worldwide marching in solidarity, 24 when I set foot in Kakuma in December of 2010. A Tunisian street vendor set himself on fire and sparked the revolution that would define the decade. The rest of the world continues to spring forward every day, his life a flash on the proverbial timeline, as if the most powerful of moments are accomplished only before we are born or after we die. The refugee protocol, the eradication of smallpox, the day when we can all finally reverse the effects of climate change. I begin to wonder if the air was as restless when my mother marched for education, if the people were as divided when my godfather and his friends organized for freedom. How do you bridge a fissure that seems to transcend time? In the absence of progress, we put the truth, the future ahead at the expense of our own well-being, with the constant question, are we doing enough? Are we asking enough? And are we enough? From Sana'a to Lesbos, from Berlin to DC, I saw people in London in solidarity with kids in Ramallah, mothers in Syria, sending love to families at the borders. On a Friday morning, I hear the news of New Zealand as I prepare for my own prayers, my veil draped over my sister and I, our mosque covered by security that day, the words, hello brother, welcome, plastered into our minds as the last thing one of the uncles said before the shooter opened fire, an offering of peace. In a moment of disaster, there are no words for the perversion of a safe space. Nothing is more wonderful than the art of being free, but nothing is harder to learn how to use than freedom. That statement is as true today as it was in the 1800s. From vigils to protests, from planning sessions to movements, we're joined in our humanity. We're growing up to become the leaders we wished for as kids, choosing triumph, choosing hope over the problems that threaten to erase us, making change not in spite of, but because of who we are. My grandmother never learned to read or write. Women weren't allowed in Sudan back then. Millions of girls are still stuck in that same space, and yet I'm here, a granddaughter of an illiterate woman, daughter of immigrants, a Muslim, a millennial, standing before you, unfazed by the people who still greet us with hatred, untouched by the rules that denied our humanity. Now I'm proud to say that yes, we're still stuck at 2 a.m., but 2 a.m. the day before our evolution, 2 a.m. the day before everything changes, as long as we change it together. The world is bitter when it's decided in our absence, so this is us showing up. This is us choosing love. Thank you. Thank you for having me.